As a child, Julia often boasted to her friends about her mother's adventures sailing on a research vessel in distant seas, conquering the highest mountain peaks, and going on archaeological expeditions. Her friends and classmates were jealous, believing Julia had an incredible mum. The truth was far from these children's fantasies. Julia's mother had simply left her family for a wealthy lover. When Julia was 4 years old, her father Thomas was laid off from his job, and times were tough for the family. Meanwhile, her mother preferred a carefree life and soon found a man who could provide for her. Julia stayed with her father and they lived in true poverty. For years, she was glad they didn't even have a camera, and therefore they didn't have any pictures from that terrible time. Thomas didn't give up, but he hardly had time to spend with his daughter. The man had to earn money wherever he could. He worked as a longshoreman on construction sites and did repair work for people. Sometimes he would ask a lonely elderly neighbour to babysit Julia in exchange for his help with repair. Other times he would just turn on the TV for Julia, lock her alone in the house and go to work. Although Julia was scared to be alone and cried every time her father left, he had to do it because they needed to survive. Despite the odds, Julia and her father not only survived, but also managed to get back on their feet. Together with a friend who had some savings, Thomas started their own business. Thanks to his persistence and luck, the family was able to leave poverty behind. However, Julia noticed that her father had undergone a significant change. Though he was tough innately, becoming rich had made him rude and cynical, leading him to believe that everything in the world could be bought with money. He no longer respected people, and when she visited his office, she saw him treating his employees poorly, thinking it was acceptable because he paid them well. Julia felt bitter and ashamed of her father's behaviour. Thomas often said that they were only after money. The girl was offended to hear that, but she understood that in most cases her father was not wrong. Time passed and Julia graduated from university and started working for her father's company. Julia's peaceful and quiet life was interrupted by a phone call from an unknown number. When she answered, an unfamiliar woman's voice greeted her and said that it was her mother, Hilary, and that she wanted to see her. Julia was stunned and didn't know what to say, but she wanted to see her and find out what had happened to her. They arranged to meet at a restaurant. As soon as Julia entered the room, she immediately recognized her mother. Hilary rushed towards her, wanting to hug her, but Julia was cold and reserved. Hilary ordered the most expensive dishes from the menu, and it was clear that she was accustomed to the luxury. Seeing Julia's uncomfortable expression, Hilary laughed and said that she had a wealthy husband who had business in the area, and that she was happy to be with him. "Daughter, I'm very sorry for what I did to you, but I just couldn't help it. Your daddy is a very tough man, and there was no way he would have given you to me. I couldn't live with him anymore. I called many times, but he said mean things to me, threatened me, and didn't even let me talk to you. I was afraid of him." As Julia listened to her mother's confused story, she suddenly realized that all of her childhood resentments had dissipated. She had come to confront her about abandoning her as a child, but instead she embraced the remorseful woman who no longer seemed like a stranger. The two women sat for a long time, sharing their stories. Julia had always thought that her mother had abandoned her because she didn't love her. But as she listened to her mother's story, she realized that her mother had been struggling with her own issues, and it was never about Julia. Julia was surprised to see in Hilary's eyes a love that she had never seen in her father's eyes. When the waiter brought the bill, Julia paid and took Hilary back to the hotel. She didn't go into the lobby, but stood in the parking lot and waved goodbye as Julia drove away. The girl felt relief after meeting her mother. She knew that she could never change the past, but she could now move forward with a new understanding of her mother. Julia met her mother several more times at different restaurants. She did not say anything to her father because Hilary had asked her to. However, he soon found out about it somehow. Thomas called his daughter into his office and yelled at her that her mother had not come back for her daughter, but for money, because her rich lover had abandoned her long ago, and she did not have a penny. Julia began to argue. And then her father asked if Julia had given her money. The girl replied that her mother had not asked, but she always paid at restaurants for her. Thomas remarked in fury that even this was enough to draw the right conclusions. That evening, Julia had a big quarrel with her father, and she was just leaving when he promised her that she would see everything for herself. And indeed, a few days later, Thomas handed her a DVD. "Is the movie at least funny?" asked Julia. "Everyone is different, honey. I was laughing a long time watching it. You may cry." What Julia saw really brought tears to her eyes. She felt again like the little girl her mother had abandoned. But then Julia trusted that one day her mother would surely return, and now she knew for sure that she had lost her forever. Julia was watching a videotape from her father's office. Thomas was sitting at his desk when Hilary walked in. After a brief exchange of greetings, Julia's father placed a thick envelope on the table and said he would pay a sum on which Hilary could live comfortably for several years, and she would promise to keep her distance from their daughter. Hilary hesitated briefly, then grabbed it, and with a few scoldings, disappeared from the office. Julia watched the video several times. She believed her mother because she really wanted her to love her, and she hoped that they would never part again. But it turned out that her mother wasn't looking for her daughter at all. She was looking for money. Did Hilary realize that in her old age she would be lonely and needless? Probably not. But now she had lost her only child forever.